Okay, next we're going to discuss making great photographs. So far, we've talked about why photography is important. We've talked about what makes a great photograph. And we've talked about finding great photos for your products, whether you happen to be making a brochure or a poster, or how and where can you find great photographs to use. Now we're going to take it a step further and talk about making great photographs. Let's say instead of finding a photo on Google or going to a stock photo site, you want to make your own photographs to use with your data visualization or in your report or in your on your poster or some other form that you might be using. We're going to talk a bit about how to make great photographs. So the roadmap of great photographs starts with a few things. It starts with a strong intent. It starts with sound technical factors. It starts with great lighting. It starts with photos that make an emotional response and composition. We're going to hit each of those in a little bit more detail. One of the very most important things about a great photo is a great photo shows a clear intent. It shows a clear message. And as a photographer, it's very important that you have intent when you're taking your photographs. What is your subject? You shouldn't leave that to be ambiguous. When it comes to selecting a subject, you should make it very obvious what your subject is. Make it clear by making sure that there's not a lot of distractions in the background, that you compose your shots using some of the best methods that we learned from composition, that the background itself doesn't become a distraction. Get close to your subject, fill the frame, make it clear what your intent is with a photograph. Oftentimes, photographs contain so many distracting elements that a viewer has a hard time really getting their eye drawn to the proper place. So I encourage you to be clear about your intent when it comes to making a great photograph. Take a moment before you even press the shutter and look around the viewfinder. Kind of sweep your eye around the viewfinder. Do you see tree branches coming in or maybe a car in the background? If you take a moment and slow down, you'll often notice things that later become distractions. But when you're looking through the viewfinder, we tend to get tunnel vision. We see our subject and we tend not to notice all of the distracting elements. But when somebody else sees it as a photograph, they're going to be distracted by those elements. So being clear about your intent is very important. And again, sometimes it's slowing down. Sometimes it's getting a different perspective. You might find that a subject shot from one angle has a busy street behind them, but shot from a different angle has a beautiful tree behind them. Taking time and really thinking about, what is in your frame can make a better photograph. So, of course, we talked previously about technical factors. We talked about exposure, a shot being maybe overexposed or underexposed, whether it was too dark or too light. We've talked about the potential for shots to be out of focus. When a subject is out of focus, it really isn't a very strong subject at all. So your subject should typically be in focus. The overall sharpness of the picture, does it look crisp? If you're using a shallow depth of field, do you have your subject properly isolated? Or did you decide that depth of field was something you wanted to have an extended depth of field and you wanted everything to be in focus from the beginning, the middle to the end? This is all about intent. Color, making sure the colors are accurate and kind of work with the palettes that you're working with. Accurate skin tones, that the color temperature is appropriate. You, again, don't want to turn people blue or orange or other colors because the camera had a hard time reading the light of the scene. And of course, you want to watch for noise, which can interfere with a quality image by kind of making it grainy and less attractive. So those technical factors are things you need to consider when making an image. Great light is certainly something you want to think about when you make an image. Great light can be, the direction of the light, kind of the way it's shining on a subject. It can be, the color of the light, the intensity of the light, but really being thoughtful about lighting before you, again, take a photograph. Look at the way the lighting's hitting your subject. Look at the shadows. Do the shadows do what you want them to do? Sometimes we take pictures of people standing kind of near a tree, and what they end up with are tree-shaped shadows on their face. Well, that may not be intended. Taking a step back, you could get them in deeper shade where they would probably have much evener skin coloration and no shadows. So what I want to encourage you here is not to become an expert in lighting, but I want to encourage you to think about the lighting. Think about the time of day and how that can affect your lighting. During the hour, the time before sunset, you tend to get a nice, warm color from the sun. You tend to get nice long shadows, which can be add a lot of depth and detail to a photograph. So think about those things when you're taking a photograph and see if you can improve your photograph. Think about the intensity. At high noon, you might find that the light is blowing your subject out, causing big dark circles under their eyes as the shadow and the light comes from above. So again, the tip here is really to be thoughtful about the lighting when you take a shot. and make sure that you have enough and the right kind of lighting to really make the subject clear. And of course, emotion. Emotion is something very strong. When it comes to communication, emotion is a very strong tool in helping you to communicate things. We talked before about those factors of emotion. Does it tell a story? Does it ask a question? Is it fresh and unexpected? Does it evoke an emotion? Or does it have an impact? The way to get there is to think about the other factors that we've talked about, but think about things like composition. When you use the rule of thirds, you create kind of a sense of things being off balance and a tension in the final shot that can be helpful in kind of evoking that emotion. Think about, does your picture tell a story? Look for pictures that tell stories. Sometimes it means filling the frame, getting very, very close. You get close on a portrait and you really begin to kind of crop in tightly. You can really tell sometimes a deeper story than one shot from 10 feet away. Does it have impact? So the thing I want you to do is to think about this when you're out there taking pictures. Think about ways that you can make your subject more obvious. Think about ways that you might really make your intent clear and be able to show emotion, fresh and unexpected. It might be a different perspective. Again, lay down in the grass and take a shot, with a foreground showing some of the blades of grass. Get up high if there's an opportunity to do so. Get somewhere different than everywhere that everyone takes the same photograph. So that's another factor to consider in trying to make great photographs. And composition. We've talked about composition throughout, and we talked about it when we talked about what makes a great photo. When it comes to your chance to make great photographs, you should think about these compositional techniques as well. And there are many, many more. This is just kind of the tip of the iceberg. But if you go out and you try a few of these, you'll probably end up making some stronger photographs. Think about the rule of thirds. When you go in, you go to take a shot, think about that balance. Think about having your subject intersect those rule of thirds lines that we would have over our photograph. Filling the frame. One of the best techniques is getting closer to your subject. And even when you think you're close, getting even closer. Really filling the frame with the subject that you want to show, showing your intent, making it clear. Simplifying means sometimes there's less distraction in the background. To simplify a photo, it might only mean that you actually have to approach it from a different perspective. Like I mentioned before, let's say in shot one, you see power lines clearly behind the subject, and that's kind of distracting. Well, by changing your angle, you might be able to simplify and get that out of the background. And make a stronger photograph, because there's going to be less confusion about what your subject is. It's going to be much clearer. Looking for patterns. Patterns always make it's more or less eye candy, something that really kind of draws us in and gets us kind of looking at it like, oh, look at that. That's really interesting. But sometimes it's something to get somebody into your story, into your data, into the things that you're trying to communicate. Leading lines, another technique. Look for lines that lead into your subject. These are all very simple techniques, but try a couple. Try a couple for your assignment for week 2 and see if you can, make some stronger photographs by leveraging these techniques. So one of the next things that we want to talk about is editing your photograph. So let's say that you went out there and you took some better photographs. And again, I don't care if it was with your phone or with your camera. Again, I've seen fantastic photographs made with iPhones. It's certainly, it's not that you've got to have the world's best camera to make really strong and compelling images. So let's talk a little bit about editing your photographs. I want to talk about basic edits. I'm going to talk a bit about Lightroom and Photoshop as well. So one of the first things that you need to do, and we're going to go over this in a moment kind of as a demo, but one of the first things that you need to do when you bring your images onto your computer, and that's where you're going to edit them in most cases, although certainly you can edit images on a smartphone or a tablet today as well, but I'm going to focus on bringing them onto your computer and editing them on your computer. So one of the first things that you want to do is you want to quickly go through your images and find the images that you really like. Find the images that you think are great. The way that I typically do that is I import my images onto my computer, and then I go through a rating process where I rate the images anywhere from 1 to 5 star. 1 star is an image that will never see the light of day. It's probably blurry, it might be underexposed, it just wasn't technically very good, didn't tell a good story. A 5 might be a fantastic picture that just right out of the gates, it just engages me and captures kind of my mind, and I'm like, this is fantastic. A 3 is kind of average. It's like, it's technically sound. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not a great storytelling image, but it's a good image. A 4 is one that I think is worth doing something with. It's a strong image. It tells a story. It does something well. A 2, well, again, that's on the below average. Anything below average, I don't want to waste time on. In fact, as a photographer, if I go out and take 100 pictures, I might find that 90 of those are pictures that I don't do anything with. Now, only 10 or 15 might be really kind of terrible, and there might be, 70 that are okay. They're fine pictures. There might only be 10, though, 15 that really are great photographs that I want to do something with. And out of that, there might only be 2 or 3 that I think are worth sharing or showing. So, there's an important step of kind of editing or selecting photos to show your best work. And one of the tips of being a better photographer is to show fewer of your images. You want to be a better photographer, show the really strong images. Don't make people look at all of the images that are just kind of okay. Because when you do that, when you show your best work, you're showing these are the kinds of photos I'm capable of making. So one of the first things that I do when I bring photos into the computer, I rate them. Again, it might only be 10 or 15% that make the initial cut of photos that I'm actually going to do something with. But that process is really important. And it also saves a lot of time because I don't want to spend a lot of time editing photographs that I'm not going to do anything with. So that selection process is really important to kind of narrowing down this list of 100 or 200 or 300 pictures down to something that I can actually edit and manage and do some great things with. So selection is the first step of the process. After I select photos, I do some basic edits. Basic edits might include things like cropping the photo. Now, we talked about the importance of composition. Well, let's say that when you took the photo, you didn't quite get the composition where you wanted it to be. You can actually crop it, crop out distracting things from the background, make the photo have a better composition. And that's a fairly simple process. You can also do things like rotate the image to get the horizon straight if it so happens that when you shot your subject, the horizon wasn't straight. You can do all sorts of basic color adjustments and shadows and highlights and all sorts of basic edits that we'll look at in just a moment. One of those basic edits is something called white balance, and we've talked about that before. We've talked about how light has color, and usually your camera does a pretty good job of reflecting accurate color, but sometimes your subject come out too warm or too cold in terms of the white balance, or what we call the color temperature. Color temperature on a cool end might make a picture look blue. On a warm end, they might look orange. When the camera's reading well, they should look fairly natural. But even a fairly natural photo, sometimes you want to warm up a little bit, give somebody a little bit more of a vibrant skin tone. So we'll talk about how you can do white balance adjustments, how you can adjust color and even do that selectively. If you want to bring up a certain color or reduce a certain color, there are ways to do that within these editing tools. So I want to talk about the tool Lightroom. And often when people think about photography, they first think about Photoshop. And there's a good reason. Photoshop has been kind of the gold standard among photographers for many, many years. Photoshop is a program that does many things for many different kinds of creative professionals. It really focuses on everything from graphic artists to photographers to people that are doing, even video work as well. And Photoshop has a tremendous amount of power and does a lot of things. Well, several years ago, Adobe and several other companies began working on other products that were a little bit more tailored to photographers, because even though we call it Photoshop, it's really Photoshop that does millions of things. And they began to make a product called Lightroom, which Lightroom was designed to be really a targeted program to target most of the needs that photographers have. It's a way for photographers to organize their photos into catalogs. It's a way for them to import photos and keep them well arranged so they can find them. It's a way to develop or edit photos so that when, as a photographer, you go out and you shoot those 100 photos, you can bring them back into Lightroom and make your edits to get them to look the way you want them to look. And it's also a platform for sharing. So it's a really targeted platform that really handles photography and a photography workflow well. So I'm going to spend a little more time talking about Lightroom than I will Photoshop. And Photoshop, again, is fantastic, but it's the power tool. If you can't do it in Lightroom, you might end up in Photoshop. Let's say we're going to talk about this in a bit more detail, but let's say that you want to take 2 images and merge them together. Well, Photoshop's going to be your tool for that. But Lightroom is going to handle probably 95% of the needs that an average photographer will have with their basic editing workflow. So at this point, what I want to do is do a quick demo of Adobe Lightroom, and we'll kind of walk through some steps and see how this works out. So we're going to go ahead and open up Adobe Lightroom, And as I open up Adobe Lightroom, you'll notice, first of all, I've got a nice picture here of the Ian staff from a while ago. But you're going to notice here at the top, Library, Develop, Map, Book, Slideshow, Print, Web. These are some of the modules of Lightroom and some of the things that it can do. As I mentioned before, Lightroom kind of acts as a library, where you can kind of organize your photographs and keep them in different folders and groupings, and you can add keywords and do all sorts of things that help you to catalog your photographs. But of course, one of the big points behind Lightroom is the Develop module. Develop module is what enables you to take photographs in and edit them and select them and do all sorts of great things with them. And then we've got ways to put your photos on maps and put them in books and slideshows and even put them on the web. So I want to start off with a sample workflow. Let's say that I've come back from shooting some pictures that I might want to use with my data visualization. Well, my first step is to insert the card. So I take my memory card and I insert it in my computer, and I've done that here. And then I press the Import key over here in the Library module. And when I press Import, it's going to find whatever happens to be there. And in this case, it finds the memory card from my Nikon D800, and it selects all of these photos to import. Now, when you import, you can tell it to do lots of different things. You can tell it where to put the photo. You can tell it even how to name the photo. If you want to rename the photo, you can have it do that. There's all sorts of things that you can do on import. You can even apply presets. So let's say that you want to convert all the shots to black and white, but you don't want to have to spend all your time doing it after you import them. You can go here, and there's these presets that you can use to apply to the photograph as they're imported, which is really pretty interesting. So if we wanted to select one of those, we would select one, and it would add it automatically to all of the pictures. But basically, typically what we do is we have a folder that we're using. And in this case, I've selected a folder called Pictures, and Lightroom's automatically going to create a date folder to put it in for me. So I need to do nothing else. I'm going to hit Import, and that's going to begin the process of importing my files. Now, this is something that can take a few moments, and what it'll do is it'll take the pictures off of the memory card. It will import them into the destination that I set up. So in this case, it's going onto my hard drive in a folder that I had specified. And then it will prepare them for being developed or being edited. And you can see up at the top right corner here, it says Copy and Import Photos. And we've got a status bar, so it's showing us what's happening. And in this library module, while we're here, I'll kind of point out to you that you can look at these images in different ways. Right now we have kind of a grid view. We can go to a single image view if we want. We can do a before and after. So if we've edited shots or we want to compare two shots, we can do that as well. We even have kind of this little survey mode where you can kind of pick which one you like the best. All sorts of things that you can do here as you're importing these photos. Now you may notice that some of these photos, I've actually brought these in as unedited photos, but they actually were photos that I had edited previously. I didn't save my edits, but it did actually bring in some of my star ratings. And these were photos that I'd done from a shoot out on an oyster boat. And we'll take a look in a minute because I'm going to show you that selection process. Over here in the library module, even though this is the library module, it's really for organizing photos. You'll find that there's some quick develop settings, and you can actually do some basic editing and keywording in this library module. Keywording is important because it helps you to find photos that you may have previously edited. So I might want to give a keyword to all of these photos called oyster, and I can do that. In fact, these have a few keywords here, but I can do that by going into this keywording module. Over on the right-hand side, you'll see it shows you catalog, and this shows you kind of the folder structure where it's putting things. You also have publish services here as well. So from Lightroom, you can instantly push your photos to Facebook or Flickr or a whole slew of other services. I use something called Photo Shelter for my professional work, and I can actually push things from Lightroom into there. Now, to point out down along the bottom here, and I'm going to make this a little bit bigger, I think, just to kind of give you a fuller view. You see down on the bottom we have this little film strip looking segment. And this film strip segment is kind of a look at all of the images in that particular set. What I'm going to do is it appears that all of my images have now been downloaded to my computer. So I'm going to move from the library module into the develop module. And this is where I would edit my photographs. So in the develop module, you will have the ability to go through and edit. Now what I'm going to do, these all actually have been rated previously, but I'm going to show you the process. What you would do is you would go through your photos, and they would have no ratings to start with, and you would use the numbers of 1 through 5 to assign them a rating. So if I press 1, you'll see that it drops it, and look at the bottom corner here, it dropped it to 1 star. Now, that's not necessarily a 1-star image, but that's what it would do. And I would quickly go through all of my photos and assign some kind of value, okay? And I just kind of go through, next image. Okay, now I have 2 selected here. We want to kind of unselect that. There we go. So we're going to kind of go through, and here I would go through and rate any images that I had. You know, maybe I decide that that's a 3, and I decide that that's a 4. I would just give those images ratings. Once I've done that, and I've gone through all the photos, and I'm just going to pretend here just for the sake of time. Once I've done that, I can then filter out. Let's say that there were some bad images here that I didn't really think were strong. You know, maybe we're going to make that a 1. You know, we're going to make that a 3. Let's say that I'm now ready to edit my photos. What I typically do then is I turn on a filter, and the filter can filter by different things. What I like to filter by here is rating, and then I give it a 4-star. And what that then does is it shows me everything that I've rated 4-star or higher. That way I'm not spending time editing photos that really weren't that good to start with. So once I've done that filter view, then I begin doing my editing. So I don't typically even edit the things that were 1, 2, or 3 stars. That's my own workflow. People can do this however they choose. If I wanted to edit this photo as an example, this is one that was done before the sun came up. There was some light coming in on him from the side. One of the first things I might do is decide to crop this photo. And you see over on the right here, we have these tools. We have a cropping tool, a red eye tool, a clone tool, all sorts of things that you can do here. Even filters, you can brighten teeth and all sorts of great things. But the first thing that we have is a cropping tool. And with that, I can kind of take my image and crop it. Let's say I wanted a slightly tighter shot. Okay, I now have cropped the image. I can even rotate. So from the cropping, if I need to kind of turn the image, I can rotate that here. You can kind of straighten out a horizon. That might be something that I would do. If we find one, let's see if we can find one that actually has a horizon. So you see this horizon line is kind of crooked. So we might decide that we want to fix that, and we can do that by kind of rotating the image. We then fix the horizon line. We might still crop it. I don't like how the crop is over here, so I might do something like that. You know, basic, simple crop. So moving along, we have a lot of other tools here, and I'm just going to minimize this a little bit smaller just to make our work area bigger. Over here, I can adjust things like the white balance, so you can see the effect that this has, whether it kind of makes things blue or orange. And we even have custom filters here. I can say as shot, that was how it was shot. Let's say I wanted to warm it up slightly. I can bring a little bit of warmth into it. Changes the white balance. I have something for exposure. Is it underexposed? Is it overexposed? One of the things I recommend doing with any of these programs that have sliders is taking your sliders and pushing them as hard as you can in one direction or the other and seeing what happens. Contrast, might add a little bit more contrast. Highlights, this will pick up the sky a little bit better, so I might kind of bring out some of the highlights here. These are all things I can do. I can add to the vibrance and the clarity of the image. I can bring up the saturation. You can see that would really make things a little crazy here. I can adjust tonal curves. All sorts of edits that we can do at this juncture. When I was done doing my edits, I'd move on to the next picture. And as I edited that or exported that image out, I'd be able to use it wherever I wanted to. So again, sample workflow here might be after we've selected our image, we might do a basic crop. So we take our crop. I want to tighten that up a little bit. There's some orange in the background, but you don't see it very well. And I know that if I kind of bring my highlights down a little, that's going to help. And I might up my saturation a little bit to bring out some of those colors. You know, all sorts of things that we can do to kind of make a difference in the photo. And you can even selectively kind of look at some of the colors as well, which is really interesting. I can take a look here and say, well, let's really take a look at those oranges and punch them up some. Okay, you can see what happens as we kind of play with that slider. Again, just trying to show you the potential here. So when you're done with that, you could then come up here to File and Export, and you could export the image as a file to your desktop, which you could then use in your presentation. You have all sorts of options when it comes to an export in terms of, you know, where you want the file to go, what format should it be in? What quality should it be in? Is it going to be used for the web? Is it going to be used for print? You can make all those adjustments here. You can even say, give me a particular size and resolution. It should be no bigger than a certain thing. Maybe it's adding a watermark to your photo. All things you can do through Lightroom. So Lightroom is a very powerful tool. There's a lot of presets. I mentioned this before. These are kind of recipes, for lack of a better way to put it, but you can use these to quickly apply to photos to get a certain look to the photograph. All sorts of things that you can do. And again, a large part of basic editing that you may do for a photograph would happen right here in Lightroom. You never have to go into Photoshop. Now, where might I go into Photoshop? Well, let's say I wanted to take this oyster, instead of having it be an oyster, I wanted it to be a hammer. Well, that's something you wouldn't necessarily do in Lightroom, but you could do in Photoshop if you wanted to. And I don't mean that to sound like Photoshop is only for adding hammers. Photoshop does a tremendous amount of things, and anything you can do in Lightroom, you could do in Photoshop. But Lightroom is really optimized for photographers' workflow. So it's really optimized to make an easy working situation for photographers so they can do the majority of their work with as little friction as possible. There's all sorts of other filters that you have. You can sort by camera information. You can look at your histogram. All sorts of great stuff you can do. I'm only scratching the surface here. My point to you is that Lightroom is a fantastic tool for editing your photos. And as part of your homework for next week, I'd like you to explore Lightroom a bit and understand some of the things that you can do. So with that, let's return back to our presentation. And I want to talk a little bit about Photoshop, but I'm not really going to go into great detail in Photoshop today. But again, Photoshop and Lightroom are products both from Adobe. They're kind of a continuum. You can take a product from Lightroom into Photoshop. So when you need to work in layers, or you need to do compositing where you're adding elements from different photos together, or you want to use actions or do things that you want to be able to do over and over again, Photoshop's a really fantastic tool. It is kind of the gold standard. That said, in my personal workflow, 100% of my images see Lightroom. From there, I kind of select and I find the images that I'm going to be working with. The percentage of those that go to Photoshop is fairly low. It's the ones that I want to do something special with. Recently I was shooting a Cub Scout event, and we kind of shot them on a green screen, and then I wanted to be able to kind of put them in a soccer stadium or on a street at a festival. I could easily do that in Photoshop by removing my background and adding a layer and adding backgrounds and all those fantastic things that you can do. So Photoshop, I don't want to minimize it at all, but in the timing of this workshop, I'd really like to focus on Lightroom, because I think that it'll give you more bang for the buck with very little investment in terms of getting up to speed and learning it. There are great resources for learning Photoshop, books as well as courses. I would strongly encourage you to dig into if you really get serious about photography, because it is very helpful to know how to do a lot of the things that Photoshop can do for you. So with that, let's finish our presentation here. If you want to learn more about photography is a very broad subject. I teach my intro to photography course is a 24-hour course, so it's 2 hours a night for 12 nights. And obviously in this science visualization course, we're not putting that much time into photography. So photography is very, very broad. There's a lot more that we could put into it. But hopefully this course has helped you understand why it's important, how you can use it to make your products better, and maybe even giving you a little bit more of an interest in photography, which would be great. If you do want to learn more about photography, there's a lot of great resources online. YouTube, of course, is a wealth of information if you can figure out how to wade through it effectively. There's a lot of great books out there. Lynda.com is a great source of online training, as in something called Kelby Training. Both of those are subscription services, but well worth looking into. One of my favorite books for somebody getting serious about photography is a book by Brian Peterson called Understanding Exposure. In fact, I like the book so much I use it as a textbook in a course that I teach. These are all fantastic resources. So hopefully that gives you a direction to go if you're looking to learn more. So from there, this kind of wraps up our presentation on photography. We're going to have a couple other segments here. If you have any questions for me, of course, we'll have the upcoming lecture. And here's my contact info as well. And I look forward to seeing you all in our class coming up.